It seems like in the last few years, museums have become more and more interested in discovering the stories behind the objects they collect. Usually, when people bring up the idea of provenance, they're thinking of anthropological objects like the bust of Nefertiti. But this growing desire to understand the context surrounding object collecting also extends to biodiversity.
What I'm interested in is how did our collection evolve and how did it end up in this museum?
This is Ildiko Szabo, the curator of the Cowan tetrapod collection at Vancouver's Beatty Biodiversity Museum. Tetrapods are exactly what they sound like: animals with 4 limbs and a spine. A few months ago, I was interviewing Ildiko for the museum's YouTube content when she discovered something unusual.
So I went to get out the original journals, and I've now discovered we have a collection of 51 birds from the Easter Island, all from 2 months, and that is January and February 1965.
Ildiko was very excited. Birds are her specialty, but she had no answers for the question on everyone's mind. How did these birds from a remote island in Polynesia end up at UBC? So she did some digging.
It turns out McGill University sent a medical expedition to the Easter Islands with a UBC prof, Ian Efford, to find out the general health.
The idea was to create a comprehensive health record of the locals on the island before the construction of an airport connected them to the rest of the world. But that still didn't explain the birds.
This was a medical expedition, but Efford and Matthias were in a separate division.
They were tasked with creating an inventory of all flora and fauna living on the island.
It turns out that Efford was an excellent choice. Efford had a background in entomology, ecology, oceanography, and tetrapods. He was exceptionally qualified.
So head of the expedition, Stanley C. Scarena, reaches out to Efford to invite him to join them on HMCS Scott, a Canadian military vessel.
Efford accepted on one condition.
He wanted an assistant.
He was told yes on the condition that the assistant was male. So the reason he had to bring a male was because that was going to be his cabin mate.
After several months of planning, Ian Efford and his assistant Jack Matthias meet the ship in Panama where they've been doing research, and from there they sail to Easter Island.
Before you can study ecology, you have to know what's there.
So as soon as they arrived, they began collecting specimens of everything and anything.
And biologists and ecologists were doing this all over the world, and they had been doing this for centuries, famously with Captain Cook and then later with Darwin on the Beagle. So I think they got off the ship and just thought that they had the right to collect plants and that they didn't think about it one way or another.
The expedition had gotten permission from Chile to carry out their research, but Ildiko doubts that these permissions extended specifically to biodiversity collecting.
But we have to go back to the 60s and the prevailing attitude in the 60s, and viewing it with a lens from 2025, I feel is a mistake. The word biodiversity, I don't think it was coined yet. It's still a decade before CITES. And permissions were just not asked for. It was not part of the scientific or biological collecting culture of the times. Now, it's normal to get all sorts of permissions for biological collection. One of them has to do with the right to walk on the land. There is also, shall we say, social permission. It depends on what you're collecting. If it happens to be birds, you have to get a permit from the appropriate government agency. Your study has to be approved.
As Efford and Matthias collected, they began to attract the interest of locals on the island.
There are images of them with butterfly nets swooping the top of grasses to see what they could get. And I'm sure that there was some teenagers and young children that were dying to find out what they would get when they did that.
In her book, Stanley's Dream, The Medical Expedition to Easter Island, Dr. Jacqueline Duffin attests that local teens, Raul and Gerardo, often tagged along with the ecologists, helping them collect specimens. In retrospect, Ian Efford recognized their contributions to his research, but at the time they were never credited as collectors. From the 1800s into the 1960s, the Chilean government confined local islanders to the village of Hangaroa. To travel with the ecologists, the teens needed special permits, giving them access to parts of the island that were otherwise off limits. Duffin also compiled a list of the specimens Jack and Matthias collected on the island.
plant collection of more than 250 species, 200 soil samples, 2,500 fish, 150 mounted insects, intertidal invertebrates, mollusks, zooplankton, phytoplankton, approximately 40 birds, and 30 lizards. The megafauna was the birds. If you look at the dates of when the birds were collected, he turned his focus to birds only in January. And when you consider the total number of specimens he collected, the birds probably took the most prep time.
Ildiko estimates Efford collected over 50 bird specimens during the expedition, sometimes collecting 10 or more of the same species. This might seem like a lot, but Ildiko explained that in order to collect accurate statistics on a population, scientists need to collect around 20 bird specimens at least.
So he didn't actually collect 20 of anything, but he did collect several. This would allow him to have some males and females, and you would also hope to get some juveniles.
Back at the BD, Ildiko was able to find 3 native bird species that Efford collected.
We have 11 Christmas shearwaters. We have 2 white terns and 1 chromatic petrel. And there's only a singleton of those, so I would assume that that was a rarer bird. So he might have been very delighted to get that.
Ildiko also produced several more invasive and introduced species Efford collected. 1 adult and 1 juvenile Chilean tinamou. Ildiko thinks that these were for eating. A duke finch, possibly an escaped pet. Several caracaras or chamangos. And a very small house sparrow, perhaps a product of something called the island effect.
Where some animals become rather large and other animals become rather small. An example of this would be Komodo dragons, which are huge, which are found on an island that has miniature elephants. I'm wondering whether Efford, in his massive collecting efforts, had the time or the energy to keep a journal. What else did he observe?
In the archives, I found a letter from Efford to a fellow researcher sent shortly after he returned from Easter Island. Here's Ildiko reading it now.
When does one conserve? The island is so small that a dandelion introduced at one end spreads everywhere without any trouble, so that one cannot conserve the natural state. All that one could hope to conserve would be part of the island, so that somewhere amongst the mass of cosmopolitan plants, one may be able to find a few of the original inhabitants.
Efford goes on to write about a volcano on the island that shows potential for conservation.
Its efficiency in conserving the natural vegetation will be greatly increased if the Chilean government will take an active part in this conservation. At the moment, they appear uninterested that there is only 1 Sephora toro miro alive on the island.
Reflecting on Efford's role in the expedition, Ildiko is reminded of a modern concept called One Health.
And the concept of One Health is that in order to have human health, you have to have healthy soil, healthy air, and healthy flora and fauna. They were ahead of their time because they asked for there to be a biologist as part of the expedition. That it wasn't like, we've got room for 1 more. It was, no, this is part of our mission.
Despite numerous references in other people's papers, Efford never published his own work from Easter Island. It was disappointing to see Efford collect so many specimens in collaboration with the local community on Easter Island, only to leave them hanging, with no future studies or updates on the research to be found. That was until Ildiko pointed out that the specimens themselves are Efford's lasting contribution to the Rapa Nui people.
As mammals and birds grow their fur and feathers, they capture what we now call the signature of the water and the air.
These signatures can be used in isotope studies to learn more about the diets, migration patterns, and environmental conditions of a bird.
So in terms of the birds in museums from this time that came from Easter Island, we have the largest collection. So it's very, very important as a representative of the 1960s. The other thing about specimens is you don't know why you're making them, because the equipment for future investigations has not been invented yet. So I am absolutely sure that these specimens will be in papers in their future, and you never know which one's going to be useful.
Thank you for following along on this podcast. If you're interested in learning more about the resources I used to tell this story, you can check them out below.